Macbeth has an incredible imagination. And I'm not just saying that because he sees daggers floating in front of his face or ghosts at his dinner parties. I'm saying that because he's able to imagine his future with such intensity that his fantasies of the future quite often become reality. His fantasies change the world. But that makes it sound like it's all fun and games for Macbeth, that all his dreams come true, and obviously that's not what happened in this play. He doesn't just fantasize about being a king, he also imagines his own suffering. His imagination contains both his hopes and his fears. There are scorpions in his mind. Imagination in Macbeth is both a catalyst and a curse. Macbeth lives in a fantasy of the future, and that inspires him to act in the present. His imagination motivates and inspires him, but by living in his fantasy of the future, he removes himself from the ethical responsibilities of the present. His imagination turns him into a monster. And that's what we're going to talk about today, the role that imagination plays in Act 3 of Macbeth. And if that sounds like it's your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. And with that out of the way, let's go through Act 3 of Macbeth play by play. Act 3 opens with Banquo imagining the possibilities of the future. He begins to fantasize about how his children might one day become kings, but he stops himself by saying, "Hush, no more," unlike some other characters who don't stop themselves. Banquo can't let his hope for the future interfere with his experience of the present. But it's not just his own mind that interrupts this fantasy, it's the entrance of Macbeth. What follows is a fascinating conversation between these two soldiers. Macbeth seems torn between earnestly wanting to invite his friends to the banquet that night and trying to discover Banquo's exact plans for the day so that he can arrange to have him murdered. Obviously, you can play the scene as Macbeth simply being manipulative, promising a dinner that he knows is not going to happen so that he can efficiently eliminate Banquo and Fleance. But I think that we can also see the scene as Macbeth's psyche fracturing in two parts. He feels both the urge to be with Banquo and the urge towards self-preservation, the urge to kill Banquo. Macbeth is king, for now, but the prophecy said Banquo's children will become kings. He says to be thus is nothing, but to be safely thus. Our fears in Banquo stick deep. His efforts have made him king, sure, but they might also make them kings, the seeds of Banquo kings, and that scares Macbeth. He's already thinking about the future, and those thoughts inspire him to wage war against the present. And I think it's worth investigating that metaphor that Macbeth uses here as well. He says the seeds of Banquo kings, and we've seen that metaphor already in this play. Banquo, for example, says that the witches can look into the seeds of time and say which grain will grow and which will not. And Duncan says to both Macbeth and Banquo that he has begun to plant thee and will labor to make thee full of growing. This play is filled with imagery that emphasizes natural growth. And Macbeth stands in stark opposition to that natural and slow temporal order. His imagination leaps over the time it takes seeds to germinate and flourish and moves straight to the harvest. Macbeth hopes to remain king for as long as possible, but this hope lives alongside a fear that his friend might usurp him in the same way that he usurped Duncan. Macbeth can imagine both possibilities, and the strength of that vision fractures his relationship with the natural order of time and his community. It's difficult to nurture his relationships in the present when he's constantly living in a fantasy of the future. His anxiety about the future disconnects him even from his wife, who he has so far shared everything with. He doesn't tell Lady Macbeth about his plan to kill Banquo. He tells her to be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck, till thou applaud the deed. And with that, he defers his relationship with her. Once Banquo is dead, then he can confide in her, but not until then. And with that deferral, he has isolated himself from even his closest and most trusted companion. And she knows him well enough to know that he's retreated too far into his imagination, into his hopes and fears. She asks him directly, "Why do you keep alone of sorriest fancies your companions making, using those thoughts which should indeed have died with them they think on?" She tries to rescue him from the ways that he lives inside his imagined future, but he chooses not to confide in her, taking all his anxiety on by himself. At this point in the play, he is truly alone. Macbeth begins this play as part of a community. At the beginning, he fights in service of his king. He meditates on life with his friend. He confides in his wife. In other words, he has relationships. But by murdering Duncan, it seems that he's murdered his ability to live in community with others. The only people that know about his plan to kill Banquo are the murderers he's hired to kill Banquo, and he clearly doesn't trust them since he sends a third murderer to watch them. Macbeth's fear of a future where Banquo or Banquo's children betray him inspires Macbeth to hire 3 assassins, and they will murder Banquo in scene 3. But Fleance will flee, and this fuels Macbeth's anxiety to even greater heights. He will become even more isolated as he retreats further into his own imagination. As I said at the start, imagination is both a catalyst and a curse in this play. It inspires action, and it condemns Macbeth to an increasingly lonely existence. And that brings us to scene 4, the banquet scene. A scene where Macbeth's imagination not only fractures his relationship with his community, but it fractures the relationship that he has with reality. After Macbeth welcomes his guests, he learns that the murderers have successfully killed Banquo, but not Fleance. Macbeth has betrayed his responsibilities as a host and a king by having one of his guests and subjects murdered. And yet, that murdered guest appears at his banquet anyway. For me, the appearance of this ghost is a psychological break where Macbeth's imagination is torn between his desire to have his friend Banquo at his party and his fear that Banquo lives and may conspire against him. His imagination places Banquo at the party as an expression of both his hopes and his fears. Again, imagination is a catalyst and a curse. Macbeth says, "The time has been that when the brains were out, the man would die, and there an end. But now they rise again." And this once again calls attention to the ways in which Macbeth has disrupted the natural order of the world. Macbeth's imagination is constantly engaged in a war to control the future, and in doing so, he never takes the time to fully process the past. As a result, the past will wage a war against Macbeth by sending him a ghost, an imagined embodiment of his guilt. And Lady Macbeth again tries to help him work through it. She covers for him. "The fit is momentary," she says. "Upon a thought he will again be well." But, of course, he isn't. She will eventually need to dismiss everybody from the party. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are left alone on stage at the end of Act 3, Scene 4, and Macbeth tells her, "I am in blood, stepped in so far that should I wade no more, returning were as tedious as go o'er. Strange things I have in head that will to hand, which must be acted ere they may be scanned." Notably, he's using the first person singular here. This is a river of blood that he forges alone. He says that he has to act upon his fears before he can process his fears with others, and that just about sums Macbeth up, doesn't it? The strange things in his head must be acted before they can be scanned. His fantasies need to be acted upon before he can reflect on them. So he resolves to visit the sisters again, and this is the last time that the Macbeths will be on stage together. Macbeth's strongest relationship, the one that he has with his wife, has fallen victim to the curse of his imagination. And that takes us to Scene 5, where Hecate gives her long monologue. She outlines the witch's plan to use Macbeth's imagination against him. "They will," she says, "raise such artificial sprites as by the strength of their illusion shall draw him on to his confusion." And from what we know about Macbeth, this seems like it'll be an effective plan. It confirms that his imagination, even if it inspires ambition in Macbeth, is also a literal curse delivered by witches. And from this supernatural scene of witches plotting around a cauldron, we move on to the final scene of Act 3, where Lennox and an unnamed lord discuss how they are suspicious of Macbeth before moving on to discuss the political maneuverings of Macduff. Interestingly, Macduff plans to travel to England to make political alliances. So while Macbeth retreats further into his own head and forges through his river of blood alone, Macduff throws himself into a broader community of alliances. Macbeth has fractured his relationship with reality, and he lives fully inside his own mind, disconnected from any community or interpersonal relationships. Macduff, on the other hand, makes the opposite move, planning to discuss and collaborate with others before he acts. And it's worth remembering here that Macbeth is the protagonist of this play, so as we watch it, we live inside the fantasy world of this play, and so Macbeth's imagination fuses with our own. We follow him as he struts his hour upon the stage, and the world that he creates through his imagination is the world that we're living in. We ought to categorize Macbeth as the villain of this play, but that's not a leap that my brain is ever actually able to make. I also experience the fantasy of this play as a reality as I'm watching it, suspended in my disbelief, as they say. Macbeth's anxiety becomes my anxiety, and I'll pay the price for that association in the final acts of this play, but that's the topic of the next video, so please subscribe to be notified when that's published, and thank you for watching.